Good morning. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sarah from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And I'm Deenie.
And as part of our Youth Forum programme, we recently hosted a focus group and conducted a survey to students about how the cost of living is impacting their time at university. And we found the responses super interesting and we wanted to share them with the sector. So you'll hear more about that research today and also get the views of our esteemed panel of experts, more from them in a minute. Hopefully you've received the report already and watched the sound bites from the focus group. But if not, we'll discuss the key findings so you can do your homework afterwards. Very, very special thank you to StudentCrowd for being our Youth Forum partners and to Utopi for sponsoring the Youth Forum as well. And if you've got any questions along the way, please use the Q&A function and we will get to these as we go along, or we'll get to them at the end. So please do ask our panellists some important questions. Over to you, Deenie.
Cool, lovely. Welcome everyone again. And first, as ever, we've got a brilliant and insightful bunch of guests for us to discuss this topic. And so we will let them introduce themselves. Ben, can I come to you first?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Ben Roberts and I'm one of the co-founders at Utopi. So very much looking forward to perhaps some input today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Ellis. I am the resident engagement manager at UPP. So I oversee all of our Res Life programs across all of our different sites.
Hi, and I'm Tuely Robbins. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships for StudentCrowd.
Lovely, thank you, and thank you all for joining us today. Now, first, let's run through some of the key findings that we found from the research. As Sarah said, please do download the report and digest it all yourselves. This is a piece of research that we've done previously in 2023, so we've got some trends of how people have adjusting and answering these questions over the year. So 48% of students say that they're struggling financially. Although interestingly, this is reduced since 2023, which I don't think is necessarily just that cost of living is getting easier. I think there's probably a bit of normalisation there, but we can talk about that. 39% have a part-time job. Again, this is less in 2024 than 2023 when we last asked. But what we don't know is if there's side hustles that people are getting income from but don't really see it as a job. 48% exceeded their accommodation budget, mainly because they didn't want to compromise on location. And 76% feel that inclusive bills will help to keep costs down. And lastly, laundry and travel costs are surprising additional costs not usually considered. So some really interesting stats there. So please do kind of delve into the report to find out more. But in the meantime, what was your kind of initial reactions to our panelist from the report and the findings?
Should I start?
Yeah, please. That'd be great.
I think for me, although it's very clear that there's still a lot of issues for students, it was quite refreshing to see that it had improved slightly. I mean, I've been going to conferences sort of past 3 years and every year you sit there and it's really dire and sort of the state we're in. So to see that actually, I know 50%, around 50% are still struggling, but actually that's down almost 15%. For me, I think that's quite good from where we've come from. And I've seen it in other places as well, like the HEPI Unite Students Application Index that they do at the start of the year. That was a lot more positive this year as well. It suggested sort of students were demonstrating more maturity and then better financial awareness. So not necessarily that they are more financially stable, but they do have more financial awareness. So for me, it was quite, I think it was quite positive to see it. Obviously, we do have ongoing financial challenges, but from a resident engagement perspective, there seems to be a bit of momentum here that we can kind of build on.
Yeah, I totally echo that, actually. That was the thing that probably both surprised me most and also reassured me slightly. I know we're seeing from students that engage directly with StudentCrowd a lot more focus on value for money. And I wonder whether that is now playing out into how they're experiencing the accommodation itself. So because they're making a value for money assessment, their experience once they're in is not so much financial pressure because they've already considered it in the round, rather than just considering the single price tag that's attached to the rent. But But yeah, surprising to see it drop, but also, as Ellis has just eloquently described, reassuring, hopefully, too.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think for me, one thing that stood out was kind of like an expectation gap between what students kind of would like versus what they could afford. And I'm kind of left wondering why that is. You know, I think, does pricing and standard of accommodation need to be like communicated a bit earlier, so expectations are met? But sort of one of the findings was that, you know, a lot of the students are going, I had a budget in mind. When I went to sort of try and get something for that budget, it didn't quite meet my sort of needs, really. So I've ended up spending more. And I kind of wonder why that is happening. What is the gap there between expectations and pricing? And is there anything that the industry could do maybe to, I don't know, you know, share pricing earlier on in the journey? I mean, I'm not a professional when it comes to the booking process, obviously, with Utopi not getting involved in that, but I just kind of, one of the things that stood out for me was that, you know, can that be communicated better so expectations are met? And then maybe their kind of view on affordability might change as well, because it's kind of a perception thing.
One of the things that I think impacts that, and that the students told us in the focus group particularly, was around location. And that the reason their budget had kind of been busted really is because they did weigh up, actually, I can live in cheaper accommodation further away, or I can pay a bit more and be closer. I think that's where those surprising costs of transport came in as well. You know, that was the kind of the real, you know, the real kind of way up in that as well. So it's interesting, I guess, and it's to be expected. You know, the more expensive accommodation is always going to be more kind of central. And there's loads of universities that do really, really great schemes with free transport as well, and, you know, and subsidised travel. But you're right, Ben, that probably needs to be accounted for, you know, at the very, very beginning in the decision making process as well. Just interestingly, it popped up yesterday, coincidentally, that we, just going back to your point, Ellis and Tuely, kind of, we wonder if the difference is actually a normalisation that, you know, since we did this research in 2023, the cost of living situation is impacting every part of life and people are having to adjust. But also, really refreshingly, people are doing things to make lives easier. So, for example, Leeds and Manchester universities have opened up an essentials store on their campuses with food, toiletries, cleaning items, the really regular kind of staples at cost prices. So that's an indicator that actually maybe those students aren't experiencing so much of a challenge with shopping, for example, because the university has kind of put something in place for that. So it's probably a bit of a combined effort of change of perception as well as external support.
Yeah, I think it is sort of a mixture of both. Like you say, there's definitely some normalisation of the cost of living crisis and where we're at. But I think going back to sort of what Ben said, almost expectations as well. So obviously we're sort of coming out of the COVID period now where students were paying the same amount of money to not have the same experience. So they were likely to judge things a lot more harshly because they're paying a lot of money to not be able to attend certain things or to not make the most of their university experience. So generally they were rating things quite low, and we're sort of coming out of that a bit now. So expectations are a bit different. They are generally getting their expectations met slightly more. But then obviously working in sort of student experience, we are doing a lot more too to like help that. So like similar to what you said, we've done at some of our sites like community pantries where we will have sort of dry foods, tin foods there that students can come and claim it, get them if they need them, and if they want to, that if they're going away they can put stuff back into it. So there is lots more like initiatives like that. And then I think I've heard across the board like a lot of accommodations are putting on those free events for students, which is bringing that community back. So we're doing like, I mean, at some of our sites we're doing full-on programs where there might be 2 to 3 events a week, and those opportunities are there for students to come and meet other people, and that could be helping as well with, if they're having a better time, they're likely to rate things higher. So I think it's a combination of all of those things as well.
Definitely, yeah, agreed.
No, and that is, it's providing that value for money, isn't it? It's making sure that actually when they come, they kind of really feel that actually they're making that investment and they're getting something back from that investment. And Ben, I can agree more, and I think Sarah and I have spoken this all the time, is that we do need to do more to educate people about housing options and the realities of university and how things are. And there's always inroads into improving that, but I think there's still more work to do in that area.
Where do you do that? Like, do you do that at sort of right at the very beginning when they're sort of looking at the universities? Like, at what point do they currently actually look at that, or when did they get that information? Is it when they land, or have they got to do their own research? Like, you know, someone from outside of the actual operations, where do they first find out about accommodation and pricing?
They're largely oh, go Ellis.
I was just going to say it varies so much. I was at an open day the other day at NTU, and we had students from not like this incoming in year, but the year like next after that, and they're preparing that far in advance to see where it is they want to go and look at options and look into pricing. And that wasn't just like a one-off. Like, we get quite a lot of those coming through. So they're not even starting university like this year. It's some people are looking like quite far back, it seems.
Yeah. I think one of the issues is around that step even beyond that, when they're ready to go and they're starting to look at universities. It's the step beyond that when you're kind of thinking whether university is the right thing for you. I don't think the information is there, and that would come from universities. But then there's also often that information talks about first year accommodation and not really about second or third year accommodation, which, to make it sustainable, is what we need to be talking about. And I think this is one of my, is that actually as a sector, is there something we should be doing to come together to build up that awareness of programs that actually we are getting in at people, before they've got to GCSE stage even, so that actually they're understanding what their options are about next steps forward. But it's definitely a talking point and something we need to do more on. Ben, how about kind of Utopi's technology? How can that save money for operators and, in so doing, students?
Well, it's an interesting one with the student. I mean, obviously we can help operators save money because we can generally help reduce, energy consumption at this part of it. You talk about affordability and cost, like, we help the operator, but with the rent model, that isn't currently passed on to students. And I don't see it in sort of reducing rents anywhere, which is obviously another question. And I'm sure we'll go on to the bills included model maybe a bit later. But I think one thing we do and the thing that we found really interesting is incentivization and gamification is the way to get something back into the student's hands. So if it's like a win-win, if you're looking to try and reduce your energy bills and sort of incentivize certain behavior, with affordability being an issue, if you're to incentivize them with something, which obviously helps both causes, like it could be vouchers, could be, we've done all sorts of different gamification campaigns. But one thing we've started doing now is we work with a company called Fellow Humans, and we do on-site activations. We're doing one tomorrow, actually, I think, at a Downing site, which is a pasta making event, which is open, I think, for about 30 people, but they sell out like immediately. Like, we sponsor it, we pay for it. It's not expensive. It's a couple £100 to put it on. But it's showing you how, I suppose what you were saying as well, Ellis, there, it's showing you how much they want some free stuff or something to entertain them that doesn't cost them anything. If you want to try and get them bought into a sustainable program or something like that, you can sponsor stuff. That's why we're doing it. We're trying to help our clients, tenants, use less energy and therefore benefit the operator, but also give them something. And I think we're doing another one with Luna in December, which is a bauble making one, using like recycled fabrics, and again 30 spaces, and it went within a few minutes, which I think shows you the kind of appetite there is for students to get stuff on campus. And maybe that's the best way to give value back to the students, because we can't pass an energy saving on because of the rent model. So I think just engaging them properly, I'm sure Ellis knows a lot more about this than I do around resident engagement campaigns, but it feels to me like that's the kind of place to do it. What we can do with our technology is sort of enable that, through things like gamification campaigns, do on-site activations and stuff. So I think that's kind of our view on it, on this particular subject around affordability.
I think though what's interesting about that, Ben, though, is that even if the current accommodation they're in, they're not getting that rent saving that year, hopefully through the education and the communication of energy saving, means when they move forward maybe into different types of accommodation, particularly if they were living in an HMO, they might use those skills to understand how to reduce their bills moving forward. And it's a life skill, and I guess that's what you want from people. Like, you want them to engage in it. It doesn't matter if it's for 1 year. You kind of don't really want that, do you? You want them to learn skills forever.
Absolutely. Then every cohort of students that comes in behind them needs the same attention because, you know, as an operator, you're getting a new set of students every year generally. So you have to keep doing it. It's an ongoing process. But, you know, for us, data is the only way to do it. If we can show them the information that they need in order to change that behavior, that's our specialism. We put data in their hands, tell them what their room temperatures are, you know, give them some context. That's the way to do it. But yeah, unfortunately, you know, there's just not a lot of it happening. And you know, that does affect the students' behaviour. That does then affect the cost to the operator. And then, you know, if their bills go up, you know, generally the rents are going to go up to cover it because they're not going to swallow that cost. It's just not part of the business plan, is it? So their behaviour impacts their affordability at the end of the day. They just don't know it because of the rent model. That's kind of the way it kind of figures itself out.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Ben. I think, and as ever, we need to get more data. They've got lots of data out, and we need to utilise it more and make sure we're using it to make those decisions. Which is why I'm going to come to Tuely next. So location was cited as a key driver in choosing accommodation, but as Sarah said, one of the things that was a surprise was the amount of money they were spending on travel. From the data that you have at StudentCrowd, how much difference are you finding in accommodation that is centrally located over less centrally located? And similarly, what's differences between regionally and different cities that they're not all made equally? And what differences can you see between those city locations?
Yeah, there's huge differences, as you would well expect. Obviously, national averages are always fraught with challenges, but it gives us a good indicator at least. So nationally in PBSA, on average, it costs about £80 to £100 more to live in a city centre versus on or near campus. And it's also only about £15 less per week if you're in a commuting location versus on or near campus. So if your accommodation is neither in the city centre nor on campus, on average, you're only saving about £15 a week. And yet that group is likely to be spending most on transport because they need to get transport irrespective of where they're going, whether they're going to the city centre to go out or whether they're going to campus to study. It's going to have a cost associated with it, whether in time or in money. And then to that second point, there's so much difference between locations. It's almost hard to summarise. So at the very, very most extreme, the average cost in the very cheapest location versus the average cost in the most expensive location, the difference is absolutely vast. It can reach, you know, plus £350 per week more to live in the most expensive location versus the cheapest. But if you sort of remove London, because that does skew it quite drastically, and instead look at slightly wider averages. So if you compare the cheapest 5 locations in the UK versus the 5 most expensive, there's still a good £130 to £140 per week difference in the prices between expensive versus cheap locations. So you definitely do get quite a big swing depending on where you are in the country, as well as at that micro location basis, whether you're in the city centre or on campus or commuting.
It's really interesting to find out, and I don't know if any of us on the call will have the answer, but maybe it's something that we can find out, is when students are applying to university, I kind of know from sort of personal experience, sometimes those cities have kind of no correlation to living costs whatsoever. I just, you know, my stepdaughter was, you know, applying to you know, Southampton and Liverpool. You know, actually there's big difference in cost there, and I guess that's where that comment came from before about educating students earlier, because actually, you know, you can't really be on the same page if you're applying to vastly different, maybe they're not the best examples, but for example, you know, if you were applying to Bradford versus Edinburgh, you know, that would be hugely different. Yet are there students that are applying to such different cities based on a course, but actually they've got to consider the living costs, the accommodation costs, and everything as well. That swing must be huge.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially when you think of really specific courses, again, sort of drawing on personal experience, if you were going to do a postgraduate course in journalism, particularly in broadcast media, the 2 primary courses for that, you've got a choice of either being in Lancashire or central London. Well, those 2 locations couldn't be more different in terms of price of accommodation and cost of living. So it's such a big choice to make if you're then going to do that particular course, because you are choosing between those two locations in direct comparison. And so, yeah, it's kind of making sure that all of that information is transparent enough that the student is well aware of what they're signing up to right at the very beginning.
And that's a generational shift, isn't it? Because I don't think it's when we went off to university, it was course first and you get the best course for you and you go to that university, you didn't consider living costs, whereas we know from data that kind of cost of accommodation is taken into consideration when choosing that. And I think that's a shift for parents because it's not what the process they had to go through. And I guess there's an education point there for parents to say, actually, you need to look at it in the round, not just what's the best course, because that might come back to be an issue later on. Sarah.
I just want to, we've had a question come in to the chat that I'm just going to direct off, you know, on the spot to Tuely. It's from Matthew Grant, and he's talking about the difference in costs of studios. We didn't ask specifically about it in our survey because this is more about lifestyle, and we have done research into the different products. But Tuely, what Matthew's asking is, are there any thoughts on kind of minimising studios due to the cost of living crisis? My first reaction to that would probably be, any voids that we're seeing, are they actually in studios? So are students kind of voting with their feet anyway? But yeah, Tuely, what's your kind of thought on studios?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to voids because I don't have properties myself, sadly. But what I can speak to is the fact that when we look at broader cost strategies and pricing strategies, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about this at Property Week next week as well. We're seeing much stronger pricing strategies in the more affordable room types. So you're getting strong growth in rental prices in clusters with shared bathrooms, for example, whereas previously, in previous cycles, we'd have been talking about how strong studios were performing. That's definitely not necessarily been the case over the last cycle. And I think a lot of that is to do with affordability choices. And students becoming more savvy as to what they actually need versus what they'd quite like. And so making the choices to perhaps share a bathroom where previously they might have opted for an ensuite or a studio as an alternative.
I think I've seen from some of the data that we've looked at, as I think a lot of the studio voids are moving to build to rent because it's like the nearest comparison. And I think they're losing a lot of sort of studio occupancy based on that, because it's, you know, if you can afford a studio, you're not far off from being able to afford something slightly different, depending on the city, obviously. But I was thinking as well around, could you have a different rent model for studios? Because obviously it's easier to allocate cost at studio level, but it isn't at like bed level when it comes to technology. You can't really get into a bedroom unless the building's been built in a certain way to understand consumption per bed. But if you were to maybe have a hybrid model that allowed studios to be metered, for example, and then you could potentially bring the cost of those studios down and then have a bills on top solution. One of the things I've thought of over the last sort of year or so is that could be a good place to start. But I'm definitely hearing from our customers that studios aren't as well occupied as they used to be. And I think that's two reasons. I think it's cost, and I think it's also just other property that's available in the city in a different, you know, type of building.
And I think you're right there, Ben, in that looking at your kind of product mix is really important, because what you're saying, Tuely, is that actually those affordable mid-range options are going to get pushed up, and then that gap between the premium room is going to get smaller because they're going to have to come down, which actually what you're saying, Ben, is actually looking at again to kind of say, well, how do we frame this so that we get the right price and the right product for the right person in the right place? Seems to be kind of a better approach. I guess we're wondering if students reporting less financial challenges than in previous years is partly down to an adjustment in kind of how they're managing their lifestyle and how life has just changed, because I think that goes for all of us. I don't think that's students. I think we've all made sacrifices because cost of living is higher, so therefore you can't do everything that you used to do. Ellis, would you say that for your residents, kind of they are staying in more and kind of going out less? That are you seeing that across your portfolio?
I think it's an interesting question, because I think if you'd have asked me a month or two ago, I would have said yes. We did like so many surveys and focus groups last year to really gauge what it is that students want, and they were all sort of telling us, oh, we want less big events, and that was sort of echoed it. I went to one of the wonky conferences and they had students there speaking about how they felt intimidated by big events. They couldn't afford the bigger events the Students' Union ran during freshers, etc. And every bit of research we did suggested that. And then I met with 2 or 3 student unions recently in their events teams, and all of them told me that they'd seen a huge increase in cost per head so far this year, which is the first time that it's happened. And that's not just due to sort of prices increasing. They did all their stats and showed that it was students were spending more. They'd seen that their tickets were selling faster than ever, and their events were selling out quicker than ever. And they were all the sort of drinking events that the Students' Union host. So they all seem, I mean, I can't speak for everywhere, but at the 3 I've spoke to, they had all gone up this year for the first time. So that sort of contradicts everything that I thought, that students wanted less of that, and that we sort of hear of the drinking culture declining. But maybe that could just be that students are generally becoming more engaged, whether that is with the sort of smaller crafts events that we're running for free, or it is the sort of going out drinking events. And again, it could link back to what we're saying, that we are seeing this sort of increase in students struggling less with their finances. Maybe they're getting more support from their parents. I think that was raised in the report as well. But yeah, I would have said a month or 2 ago, yes, absolutely, we're seeing a shift. But then all of that went out the window in the past few weeks when I've had these meetings, and I'm being told that everything's all the tickets are going and cost per head's going up again.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that we don't have data from the report is any, I guess, demographic shifts that we've seen over the last year around who's actually going to live at university. We do know that there are more commuting students. So actually, as a consequence, is it those that are living away from university are from more affluent backgrounds and do have more of an income to be able to spend? So therefore, that aligns with what you're saying, Ellis, that actually more people are going out spending. But we do know that actually occupancy has been a challenge for some kind of PBSA operators in the area across the country, because we predict that there is some loss to, as you say, Ben, to BTR, but also commuting students just voting with their feet and saying, actually, I'm going to stay at home. Tuely, I think, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wonder as well whether if there's more commuter students or more students who are living in alternative shared living, so whether that's BTR or co-living or an HMO or whatever it might be, I wonder as well whether more of them are therefore investing in community-esque events and spending more on going to the events and going to the big ticket events, because they're not living with those people necessarily. So to get involved and build a community, they're wanting to proactively go out and spend more money on doing those events instead of spending money on their rent.
Also, I think kind of in context, a student union-esque type event is still probably cheaper than going to like a city centre nightclub or something. And actually for students, that may well be their compromise, as it were, on spending money. They still want to go out, but they are spending it more within the university kind of ecosystem rather than elsewhere. And Ben, just wondering, do you have any data to support more energy usage, which would suggest students are staying in more than they used to?
We've not necessarily noticed it through energy, but one thing we're going to do, and I did try and pull this together before this forum came together, but we've not quite been able to do it because it's actually a much bigger job than I thought because of all the variables. But we're going to do a report, I think, on occupancy over the last sort of 3 years. Obviously, we have a PIR in our centre. It's all anonymised, so we don't know who's there, but we know how long people are spending in their rooms. So what I wanted to try and do was to sort of try and answer this question or back it up in any way, if it is even valuable. But it's something we're going to challenge our data science team to have a look at, is take some of the assets that we've got that are sort of 3-4 years old, look at occupancy across the 4 years and see if now people are spending more time in the room because they haven't got as much money in their pocket. They're not going out as much, if it's a demographic thing, if it's just a generational thing, but it'd be interesting to know, with some facts really around what the data is actually saying, so you can then sort of take that in a direction that's meaningful. But yeah, what we'll do is we'll pull it together as quickly as we can and we'll release it either through maybe the House podcast, Sarah and Deenie, or we could just release it whoever wants it really via email. But we're going to pull that together and release it as a free report around how much time students are spending in their rooms now compared to the last few years.
I think that'll be fascinating, and you know, we talk a lot about product as well, and I think understanding those lifestyle behaviours then impacts how your building is built. You know, actually, you know, students spending more hours in their room. You know, do you need to consider more smart tech? Do you need to consider, you know, students keep telling us better soundproofing? You know,
laundry.
Actually, you know, yeah, laundry. Even I was in a student accommodation the other day, and they've still got TVs in their kind of living areas, and I kind of felt like maybe start not replacing them. You know, how many students are watching TV in a communal kitchen rather than on Netflix on their laptops? You know, because actually that feels generationally like what that age group are doing kind of, you know, more of. And I guess your data would show that actually in an evening, you know, more students are in their room than, you know, than maybe they were a few years ago. So yeah, keep us informed. That sounds fascinating.
Will do.
I think one thing that came out of the survey is parental contributions as well. 47% of students reported they rely on parental contributions. So that might be why students are maybe not feeling the pressure so much if their parents are kind of picking that up. Ellis, at UPP, are you seeing kind of a lot of parents making that first initial inquiry? Are they, if they're paying for more, are they, you know, I guess kind of engaged more?
I mean, I don't really know so much about the financial side as such, but I mean, I'm definitely seeing a lot more engagement from the parents and interest from the parents. For example, when we do the open days, like they are asking a lot more questions. Like I've been here for like nearly 4 years, I think, and I've worked in students' unions prior to that, and this is the most engaged I see parents. They're a lot more looking at the price and saying, okay, well, what do I get for that exactly? And then recently this year we started doing laundry bundles in advance, and we actually, I mean, we don't have anything to compare to because it was the first year doing it, but we saw quite a big uptake of them. So on the first day when students moved in, the parents could purchase 10 laundry cycles, or there's different packages they could purchase, and we saw that they were really popular, which would suggest to me that parents are helping out. But it will be interesting to see next year if that increases or how that goes. But I mean, from what I can see, there is more interest from parents because I think they want to see where their money's going. With their 9 times out of 10, they're at least helping pay for their rent, and they want to see what they're getting for that. They're helping to sort of add the additional funds. It's very rare now that a loan will cover much of the rent. So that is probably why parents are wanting to see what they're getting.
Tuely, can you see parents kind of engaging with StudentCrowd, you know, from that research point of view as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we obviously surface all of the verified student reviews, but in the background, we also collect parental reviews as well. And we never used to do that because there never used to be any. But we've now had to create like a whole new form process for them because they are engaging a lot more, and it's not just at the review stage either. We're seeing more and more parents who are engaging in the research stage as well. We talked about this on a webinar probably a couple of years ago, and it's extended even since that point as well. And even back in the midst of time when I was still at UCAS, parental engagement was massively upticking, even as I left a few years ago.
That's great, thank you. Ben, bills, your favourite topic, I'm sure. We've covered this on previous youth forums. Are you seeing anything changing around bills included or not included, and the sector kind of looking to move away from a bills inclusive model?
So I think the short answer is I don't know. I don't think they will go away from that model. But what we are seeing is people gearing up for the potential. So I mean, I think it is the kind of crown jewel, isn't it, for the sector? It's what attracts students. They want it. I mean, even in this particular report as well, it says, you know, they all want it. All the students like that certainty. But the thing is, they don't know what the impact would be of not having it because they haven't seen it. So, obviously, us as a business, we like the all-inclusive rent model because, it's the operator that's paying and we're the ones that are saving the money. So I just don't think it'll change. But what we are starting to see now, especially in new build, is just the difference in spec for the assets now is shifting towards metering properly. We're just doing one development at the moment up in Birmingham where the developers actually put a circuit system in place to be able to meter the bedroom. That's the first time I've seen that, which shows you that the buildings are being developed now for flexibility. Because I think that's one of the important things, is the asset you're building now going to be PBSA in this rent model forever? Or does it need to be flexible in the way that it can be able to gather data and potentially bill or create hybrid models? I think the obvious halfway house here is a fair use policy. And I think a lot of operators have one to some extent, but it's so difficult to police it unless you've got that kind of room level sort of mid-compliant meter where you can literally pin a rental contract to a meter and say that's yours. Clusters, in studios it's easy, in clusters it's very difficult because you've generally got 5-6 people sharing one meter at the KLD, so it's just a challenge really to do it. But what we are seeing now is, especially in development, a lot of the specifications that we're looking at, we're starting to see people build the assets for flexibility, which allows them to shift from that rent model should they need to, should the market change, should another energy crisis come. Believe me, I think if another energy crisis hit, you would definitely start to see some operators moving through necessity, not because they want to, but because they're literally, the P&Ls just won't stack up with crazy energy bills. So I think at the moment it's not going to change, and I don't think it should change because the students want it and it works for everybody at the moment. But I think having the infrastructure to be flexible on that is definitely a smart move. And we're really starting to see that now as developers are starting to specify the buildings differently. You go back to Gen 1, 2 and 3 PBSA, there's 1 meter at the front door and that's it. So yeah, it's definitely evolving, but I can't see the model shifting anytime soon, I don't think.
No, I find it really fascinating because I think there is a unwritten rule that we all think bills inclusive means that I'm paying less bills. But I don't think anyone knows that because I don't know the answer to that and I work in the sector. So it's kind of, if that view ever shifts, and like you say, it kind of start to go one or the other way, will there be a view that actually am I paying more for this than I should be? It's kind of, I think we have a view that it's a good thing because it means we pay less, but I don't know if that's the reality.
I don't know how much it'll actually save. The typical energy spend in electrically heated asset is I think about £400 or £500 a year, something like that. So if you were to cut that in half through a resident really being switched on to what they use and they were paying for it, if you look at that number of saving, that's impactful for an operator at scale if you've got 600 beds. But how much is that actually affecting the rent? How much could the operator really reduce the rent by doing it? All you're really doing is de-risking your energy bill for the operator. I don't really know how much an operator would drop their rent prices if they weren't paying for the energy bill, because I just don't know if there's enough at a unit level of a saving to have a big impact. Or is £200 a year a big discount in student rent? I don't know. But it's I'm just not sure how much of an impact it would actually have.
No, and that's interesting. Maybe that is the right thing for students and operators, and everyone kind of gets a better outcome from that. Tuely, are you finding anyone advertising on StudentCrowd that are excluding bills, and how do they perform?
Not in the UK, no. There's far more variability in Europe. So in Europe, you can have PBSAs that are offered excluding bills, but then they're very clear about what the bills might add on. So they will give an assumed percentage of your rent that the bills might add up to, or they will give you it's X amount for the rent and then it is fixed cost for the utilities. So far more variability across Europe than there is in the UK. In the UK, I didn't check in the most recent week, but yeah, it's always been all properties with bills included.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And back to you, Tuely, how often is cost mentioned in student reviews? Is value for money still a hot topic, and therefore is that what's keeping expectations high?
Yeah, definitely. It's all about value for money. It's definitely the key thing. So at the favourable end of the spectrum, we see phrases like affordable rent or great price or no extra charges or free breakfast or great value for money. They're the things that most frequently occurring. Whereas at the opposite end of the spectrum, where value is seen as poor, we're seeing phrases like hidden fees or extra costs or forced meal plan or unfair pricing and overpriced being the most frequently occurring phrases. And it's that thing of, value for money is a really personal thing. It's what you personally feel comfortable paying that provides you with the service that you expect. But some of those things that I just mentioned in those phrases there are both simple and really universal. There's such an emphasis on fairness and transparency in reviews. So it really does come down to, if you as an operator know there's a charge for something, it's important to be plain about that. Not just because it allows a student to make a proper value assessment, but it means that they also come away more satisfied because they went in knowing what to expect. And so you've met their expectation rather than broken it. And that then turns into a positive review and so on and so forth. It becomes a really self-fulfilling prophecy. But it's definitely that comparison between poor value for money is about hidden costs and non-transparency, whereas good value for money is about knowing what you're paying for up front and then that being delivered on when they have their experience in the property itself.
I don't want to open the floodgates to talk about laundry because we give over way too much time in laundry in all of these webinars, but that surprising cost came across really strongly, particularly in our focus groups from international students. They kind of found it weird, like why would you pay for laundry? It's clearly something that's maybe quite specific to the UK and something that they found particularly surprising as well. So and I think we do lots of website audits. It is there. I don't think that anyone's hiding it, but it's usually in a frequently asked questions, and then but it also says bills included. And I think a lot of the time people think, well, that's it, that's the cost, and they have to actually delve into the FAQs to find out that they've got to pay for it. So yeah, I totally agree. It's that trust thing, it's that upfront payment thing. And actually, one of the things that we did put in the report and that we've heard Wonky talking about previously is some of those online calculators, and particularly that universities use, are quite often a little bit out of date and maybe out of touch. So the students are applying to the university, they've got this online calculator, or they've got outdated data. But actually thinking about it, I wonder if that's very kind of HMO centric, and actually they're not accounting that laundry sometimes has to be an additional cost as well, and that can be as much as kind of £300 a year extra if you're doing a weekly wash and dry. I just said I'm not going to open the floodgates about laundry, and I just did a massive monologue about laundry, so I'm gonna leave it there before it takes over again. But yeah, I think the hidden costs and upfront, that's the way to manage expectations, isn't it? Because you can't fall short then.
Yeah. And loads of operators are doing it really well. Loads of operators are really clear about, you're paying this price, your bills are included, but there's also these other things that you're likely to spend money on. And it's not to undersell the fact that the sector is working really hard to be as transparent as possible. We see that because the majority of reviews are talking about the fact that people are having a really great time and they know what to expect and it's being delivered on. It's just that where there is still gaps, those things are coming out as a marker of dissatisfaction. So it's just making sure, if you're going to have a cost for something, be really plain and upfront about it. Students actually don't mind paying for things, as we've seen from Ellis's experience with the events. They just need to know it's got a cost, and know what that cost is going to be, so they can add it into their calculation before they sign up for it.
No, and I think that's a really important topic to end on, in the sense that we have to share the right information, we have to be transparent, and I think that works for everyone. We all want to know what we're buying into and what we get for our money, so that should just be standard across the board. Thank you all for a great conversation. I'm just going to hand over to Sarah.
No worries. So yeah, thank you all for joining us, and taking an interest in the data as well. And like we said, everybody that's watching will have received the report, so we hope that you enjoy it and delve into it. And we also have a load of youth forum, focus group, sound bites on YouTube as well, so that you can actually see kind of firsthand how the students were communicating this, which is often very different to the survey, which is why we do it both ways. We've created the Youth Forum to provide the sector with free insight, and we are carrying this on into 2026. Thank you very much to StudentCrowd and Utopi, who are joining us once again in the new year. We have space for more sponsors, so if anybody is interested in sponsoring the next series of reports and insight alongside StudentCrowd and Utopi, then we'll be really, really happy to have you on board. In the meantime, thank you panellists, thank you viewers, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.